Jim Candy Part 3, Chapter 1. Monday I hung out with Drew and Deshawn at lunch and in between classes, and they kept telling me the loss to Foothill wasn't my fault. "It's just because your run was the last play that everybody remembers it," Deshawn said. "If it hadn't been for what you did earlier, we wouldn't have had a chance to win. Besides, did you see the arms on that guy who hit you? They were like my legs. I swear to God, he had to have been on steroids. I think half their guys were." "You think so?" I said, looking first at Deshawn and then at Drew. "You think they were on steroids?" Drew shrugged. "I don't know. You hate to call somebody a cheater without any proof, but some of those Foothill guys were just too damn big." For the rest of the day, my mind kept going back and forth. Was number 50 a cheater? Were a bunch of them cheaters? Had they stolen the victory? Or was I being a poor loser by making excuses? Toward the end of the day, a rumor started going around that Coach Downs was quitting. "Probably they'll blame that on us too," Drew said, only half joking. Downs was a PE teacher as well as head football coach, but he had a sub Tuesday and another one Wednesday, and both days he'd had meetings with the principal and the athletic director. Then on Thursday came the announcements. All football players were to attend a meeting after school. At 2:40, I went into the commons and pulled up a chair at a table where Drew and Deshawn were slouched, heads down. Our table was way in the back and in the far left corner, away from everybody. I looked over at Matt Drager and Aaron Clark. They were sitting front and center, right where we would have been if I'd scored the winning touchdown. Coach Downs came in at 2:45, accompanied by Hal Carlson, the custodian. Carlson, a burly black man, was a decent guy, but I had no clue why he'd be standing next to Downs, unless it was to chew us out about something going on in the locker room, and 40 other guys were sitting at tables around us. Downs strode to the front of the room and raised his hand to settle everybody. "This one is hard for me to say, so I'll say it. I won't be coaching here next year. I've got an opportunity to become offensive coordinator at Pacific Lutheran, and I can't turn it down." Downs let the murmuring go for a minute or two, and then he raised his hand again. "You guys have been great, and Shoshone High has been great. You're going to beat Foothill one of these years, go to the playoffs, and take it all. I know that, which makes leaving hard. Fortunately, there is one thing I don't have to worry about. I know I'm leaving the program in good hands." He turned and looked at Hal. "Most of you know Mr. Carlson is the head custodian here. Starting today, he's also your head coach." Guys looked at one another in shock. From the front table, I heard Clark laugh out loud. "This is a joke, right?" Drager called out. "Hal's not really our—" Downs started to answer. "This is no—" Carlson cut him off. "Coach Downs, I'll handle the meeting from here." Downs looked at him, pursed his lips, and then nodded. "You're right," he said. Then he turned back at us. "I'll be around school until the end of the semester. Stop by my office any time you want." He walked to the door, turned back again to wave, and then left. As soon as the door closed behind him, Hal's eyes homed in on Drager. "Would you like to repeat that question?" Drager didn't back down. "I asked Coach Downs if he was joking." "About me being the coach?" "Yeah, about you being the head coach." "You're Drager, right? And you're Clark?" They both nodded. "Running back and quarterback, right?" Again they nodded. "The kids who got arrested?" The smiles disappeared. "Well, Mr. Drager and Mr. Clark, I will be reviewing your case in the next few weeks to determine what your future status on the team will be. Once I've acquainted myself with the facts, I'll let you know whether I will allow you the privilege of playing football for Shoshone High next year. As of now, you remain suspended. Since this is a meeting for team members only, you will have to leave." Aaron Clark laughed nervously. "Are you kicking us out?" Carlson nodded. "I'm kicking you out." Drager and Clark exchanged a look, smiled at each other and their friends, then got up and left, slamming the door behind them. My eyes, everybody's eyes, had followed them on their way out. Once they were gone, we looked back to Carlson. The fury was still in his eyes, but it was gone from his voice. "From now on, when you address me, you will either call me Coach Carlson or Coach. As to team rules, there's only one word you need to remember, and that word is respect. Respect yourself, respect one another, and respect the game. Do that, and you and I will get along fine. Don't," he looked toward the door Drager and Clark had just slammed, "and you won't be playing for me." His eye scanned the room. "All right, then. Now I want to hear from you. We'll start with the guys at the table in the back. Tell me your name, your position, and your year in school. One by one, players stood and gave the required information. Now and again, Carlson would ask a question. What do you bench press? Or how fast do you run the 40? Or what's your vertical leap? It took time, but Carlson questioned every player. When he finished, he folded his arms across his chest. His forearms were huge, a lineman's forearms. A week from Saturday, we're going down to Tacoma to watch the 4A championship game. I've arranged for a bus and I've got tickets for all of you. Attendance is required. You got a date with your girl? Change it. And don't even ask me if you can bring her. With that, he turned and walked out. Drew, Deshaun, and I left together. When we were clear of the other guys, Drew looked at me. Wow, he said. Do you think he'd really kick them off the team for good? I said. Drew shook his head. He's just trying to scare them. I don't know about that, Deshaun said, smiling. My money is on a suspension, which means you two sorry souls are going to get a second chance. Drew turned to me and punched me a few times on the arm. He might be right, Mick. At school the next day, Brad Middleton told us that Carlson had once been head coach at Snohomish High. We went to the library during English class, which gave me a chance to go on the internet to check it out. Snohomish High had a good web page, and it was so easy to find their head football coaches. Sure enough, there was Carlson's name. He'd been head coach for 9 years. Every one of his teams had winning records, and 2 of them had gone to the state playoffs. He'd coached his last team 5 years earlier, and they'd finished 7-3. I stared at the screen, wondering why he'd quit. Maybe he got burned out, or someone got sick in his family, or he hated the athletic director. Whatever the reason, Snohomish had gone straight downhill once he'd left. The bell sounded. I logged off, gathered my books, and headed toward my Spanish class. In the hallway, I spotted Coach Downs. Good luck next year, Coach, I said. Hey, thanks, Mick, he said, and he fell in step with me. For a while, neither of us spoke, but as I started down a side hall, he stopped me. You know, Mick, you could be a terrific player. You've got great moves, great speed. You just need to bulk up a little, get stronger. Hit that weight room harder, and there's no telling how far you can go. I will, Coach, I said. He clapped me on the shoulder. Good luck to you. I hustled to get to class before Miss Cost called roll, and just made it. I hadn't paid much attention to what Downs had said. I figured he was just talking to talk. But as Spanish class crawled along, what he'd meant came home. He was telling me I was weak. That's what it amounted to, when you cut through all the polite garbage. And that's what my dad had said too, though I hadn't heard it that way. They were telling me that it wasn't enough to have moves and speed. In the red zone, in those final 20 yards, power was the name of the game. Not speed, not agility, not finesse. Raw power. Part 3, Chapter 2. Saturday night was the state 4A title game. Drew wasn't crazy about going. I heard him and Deshaun were complaining that they were going to miss some movies with Natalie Vick and her friends, but I wanted to see the game. My dad always said that if you couldn't be the best until you knew what the best looked like, and Pasco was the best. Early in the season, they'd beat Long Beach Poly, a powerhouse team from California, had gone undefeated through their league, and had defeated Foothill 20-16 the week before. Pasco had a running back named Ivan Leander who averaged 10 yards every time he touched the ball. I was the first player in the Shoshone High parking lot, but I wasn't there long enough before Middleton and Jones showed up, and then a bunch of other guys came. The last 2 were Drew and Deshaun. We were expecting a crummy yellow school bus, but a luxury gray line bus pulled into the parking lot. Even after the door opened with a hiss, nobody stepped inside. Is this for us? Somebody called out to Carlson. He turned and looked back at us. Time to go, men. Tacoma is 30 miles from Seattle, but with traffic, the ride took an hour. Nobody much cared. Everybody was laughing and talking loudly, having a good time. The Tacoma Dome holds 20,000 and was about half full. Carlson had us sit as a team on the 50-yard line, high above the field. You can see plays develop better from up here. Pick out the guys playing your position and watch him closely. He's who you want to be. The Pasco players raced out of the tunnel first. As they ran, they let out a wild man roar that grew louder and louder until it exploded into the word Bulldogs. After that came a crazy howling as they crammed into an ever-narrowing circle and jumped all over one another. A minute or 2 later, the Rogers players rushed onto the field. The noise that the Pasco fans had let loose worked like a challenge to the Rogers side. They stood and hollered louder and longer. Pasco's warm-up routine was good, but Rogers's was amazing. Their coach blew his whistle, and immediately the players rushed toward the goal line, formed a perfect circle with the captains in the middle, and started doing jumping jacks, sit-ups, and push-ups. Next came another whistle, and within seconds they had broken up into 4 different subgroups, and each subgroup had a coach directing it. At the 10-yard line, 2 sets of linemen charged each other as a running back practiced hitting the holes. At the 30, the quarterback took turns throwing to receivers. Along the sidelines, the punter kicked to the return men. By the end zone, the place kicker practiced field goals. A horn sounded and both teams lined up at midfield. As the stadium announcer called out the name of each player, people cheered. But when the stars were announced, the roar would go up a dozen decibels. After the introductions came the Star-Spangled Banner, and then finally the kickoff. All through the first half, I wasn't quite sure what I was watching. It was supposed to be a game between the 2 best teams in the state, but Rogers seemed mediocre. They had only a handful of plays, and they ran them from the same formation: 2 backs, a wideout, and a receiver in the slot. Sometimes they'd send their fullback right up the middle. Sometimes they'd run off tackle with the halfback. Sometimes the slot receiver, coming in motion just before the ball was snapped, would take a handoff from the quarterback and go wide. They were incredibly crisp, just as you'd expect after watching their warm-ups. But the whole offense was simple. On most of their possessions, Rogers made a first down or 2, and then Pasco would stop them and they'd punt. They did have great special teams. Time after time, their punter would pound the ball down the field, and the cover team would pin Pasco down in their own territory. But it didn't look as though Rogers could ever score. When Pasco had the ball, the game kicked into high gear. Leander was like the Cheshire Cat. Now you see him, now you don't. Their quarterback didn't throw much, but when he did, he rifled the ball to his 2 wide receivers, both of whom had great hands. Pasco pushed Rogers around as if they were a JV team, or at least Pasco pushed them around until they got inside the 20-yard line. But once they reached the red zone, something always seemed to go wrong. On the first drive, it was a penalty for a block in the back. On the next drive, Leander was hit so hard he coughed up the ball. And on another, there was an interception in the end zone. Pasco outgained Rogers 4-1, but it wasn't until just before halftime that they finally pushed the ball into the end zone on a 4th and inches play. And even then, no one was really sure Leander had made it.